When you need a massage, you don't need more stress just trying to book one. Download the Big Toe app and get massage.
Hello, greetings, welcome everybody. Hope that you're doing well on this day. Hope that you're at your highest level of all forms of strength that you need, mental, physical, and spiritual, and hope that you're primed to reach your highest potential. And we welcome you to this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program from the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Same time, same platforms every week. And we're glad that you're here to participate in this particular topic for this week: fascist efforts to criminalize activism, efforts by organized fascist groups to make political activism, fighting for justice, become criminalized and to normalize that effort to do that. Very important topic, something that's not commonly talked about. So we're going to get into it today. So we're glad that you're here to participate in this important topic with us. And we want to, of course, give honor and respect to the native folks of the Western Hemisphere, the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, the real indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And when we say that, we're talking about the natives, indigenous, the Indian Plains people, the Mexicanos, the Chicanos, the Puerto Ricanos. We're not talking about anyone else. If you're not in any of those categories, you are not the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. As much as you want to pretend that you are, you just aren't. And we know that, especially African people, or people of African descent, this is a struggle that we're engaged in, and we welcome this struggle head on over identity. And the fact that Africa has been disrespected for 500 plus years is the reason why so many of us want to feel it necessary to separate ourselves from Africa, or not even mention our mother. But we are going to continue to challenge this backward narrative. And the reason why it's important is because we also give so much respect to our ancestors, our African ancestors, who are the reason why we're here, the reason why we're able to breathe, the reason why we're able to move, the reason why we're able to eat, laugh, the reason why we're able to participate in life is because of the sacrifices they made. And so we're not going to uh, let people disrespect their legacy by disrespecting Mother Africa. And we're also not going to disrespect the indigenous people by dismissing them and their contributions to this hemisphere. So we're glad that you're here to join us today with who we are, so that you can know who the All African People's Revolutionary Party is. So, Our Ancestors' Voices, this program is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, as we mentioned, AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, Pan African political party with a base in Africa. And we have a clear objective, and that objective is Pan Africanism. And by Pan Africanism, we mean the movement to bring revolution to Africa, to create one unified socialist Africa. That is our work, that is our objective. And this work to achieve Pan Africanism, you can find out more about it by reading Kwame Nkrumah's classic work, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, the cover of which is displayed on this screen. The handbook is a book Nkrumah wrote in 1968, and it outlines the strategy to bring about Pan Africanism, the revolutionary strategy, which is one of uniting all of the revolutionary Pan African formations on the ground into one worldwide fighting force for African liberation. And Our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by myself, Ajamu, and my biological and ideological daughter, Dr. Shakura Umi. She is, as I mentioned, preparing for an out of country trip. So I'm proceeding today without her. And so glad that you're here to participate with us on this important topic. And we'll just get right into it. And we'll start, you all, by talking about this question of collective activism as opposed to individual ideas. Collective activism as opposed to individual ideas. And what we mean by that is we live in this bourgeoisie society, meaning it's a capitalist society based on bourgeois ideas. And by bourgeois, what we mean is, bourgeoisie is a class term. It's a class term that represents the class of people who are spokespersons for the ruling class, the ruling capitalist class. That's what the bourgeoisie is, or the bourgeois. That's who they are. So when we say bourgeois society, it relates to the term that the masses of people at this stage in society's development are not the people who are writing the history of this society. The winners, the current winners, are the people who are writing history. And they do that from a bourgeois lens because that's the way that they uplift their narrative of history and justify their actions. So that's what we mean when we say bourgeois society. So the US is without question a leading bourgeoisie society. And as a result of that, we are conditioned in societies like this one to see this society the way the rulers of the society want us to see it. And that's that this is a free society. In fact, they present it as the freest society on the planet Earth, which is absolute nonsense. There's no data that justifies that kind of designation other than them saying it. But most of us don't deal with any data in any way. So they say it constantly. They constantly say it 24/7, 365 days of the year. You go to faith services, they're saying it there. You go through 12 years of education and then advanced education in college. They say it constantly throughout that rigorous and horrendous process. They say it 24/7, 365 days a year through their media outlets, their movies, their television shows, their so-called news broadcasts. And so it becomes normalized to believe it, and people do. And so because of that, there isn't a consciousness to see the backwardness of this society. And so there isn't activism to engage and work to change this society. And that's even true for people who consider themselves conscious about the contradictions in this society. There are tons of people who consider themselves conscious about the contradictions in this society, yet they do nothing to organize against those contradictions. So that's in our ideology within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. It's Nkrumahism, terrorism, Cabralism. You've undoubtedly heard of Marxist-Leninism. You've heard of Maoism. You've heard of Trotskyism. You've heard of those ideologies, those revolutionary ideologies. Well, now, if you haven't, we introduce you to Nkrumahism, terrorism, and Cabralism from Kwame Nkrumah, Secretary, and Amilcar Cabral, the ideology of the African Revolution, the ideology of revolutionary Pan-Africanism. And so what we say in our framework is that there's consciousness and then there's self-consciousness. Consciousness are the people I just mentioned who have an understanding that there's a problem, but yet they don't do anything to organize against the problem. They are aware of the problem, but they are not aware on a level that pushes them to see it as their responsibility to do something about solving the problem. Self-consciousness are people who are not only just aware of the problem, but understand that if they don't take action, the problem will never be solved, and therefore see taking action as their responsibility that they have to do. So these are the differences in this. So this is why we have this question of activism and its validity in societies like this. It's not seen. And of course, the capitalist bourgeoisie class, they do everything in their power through all the mediums I mentioned previously to discredit activism. It's just like if you think about it on this level, if you have an enemy, someone you don't like, and they are telling people that you're a bad person, and they're constantly telling people that, and then you have greater sway, you have greater contacts than they do. Maybe they have maybe one or two family members, maybe a friend or two, and that's who they're talking to. Whereas you have you have institutions that you participate in, so you have dozens of people you can talk to about them, and you begin to tell people where they're insane. They're jealous of me and my success. They're doing that. You have the capacity in this example to really dominate the narrative of what's being said by you about them compared to what's being said by them about you. Well, this is what we're dealing with in the capitalist system because it has the tentacles to reach so many resources and to shape so much of the narrative. They present activism as unnecessary. In fact, they even suggest that people who engage in activism are um, unhinged, something wrong with them. Like there must be something, because why would you engage in activism in the greatest society on earth? What would you want to change in a society that cannot be matched in terms of its greatness? So this is the narrative. And even people who consider themselves having a consciousness about these problems believe that narrative on some level. Believe that narrative that activism is just not necessary. Otherwise, they would be doing it. So that's the only thing that explains why they don't do it, because they feel like, well, it's just too much. It's just not something that I can do. And really, if you think about it, and if this is you, you really should think about it. That is a very elitist perspective because it's rooted in the reality that people who benefit from activism see it as someone else's responsibility to carry out the activism. That has to be true, because if you're not doing it, but yet you claim that you see it as important and necessary, that has to mean that you either consciously or unconsciously see the activism as someone else's responsibility. So this is the type of reality that we exist in under it, and that's why, as it says on the screen, it's almost, it's just like the equivalent of expecting wolves to provide an objective perspective of the value of sheep. That's what you're doing when you expect the capitalist system to respect activism organized to confront the capitalist system. It is never going to happen. Just like wolves are never going to argue for sheep being having the right to live. That's just not going to happen. And so that's why we have this dichotomy in this society today. So, collective activism is people coming together to engage in work to challenge the status quo. And the people who engage in collective activism are working with people. They're learning different things so that they can understand how to do the work better. They have to develop a certain level of humility, because that's the only way that they can effectively work with all different types of people, which is required in any level of collective activist work. And they're also having to ensure that they're constantly increasing their consciousness so that they can have the tools to fight all of the challenges that are going to come their way. On the other side of the coin, individual ideas are reflective of people who just have things that they have operating between their ears that oftentimes are based in idealism, meaning they're not based in material reality. They're just based on what's operating between people's ears. And they don't have those ideas between their ears, don't really have any concrete manifestations in reality. So, as an example, people who function in this realm primarily will believe things like, well, no matter what we do, no change will happen, or the problem is just, we can evaluate the problem effectively by just looking at the victims of the problem and not looking at the perpetuators of the problem. These types of things that happen every day with a whole lot of people, or just easily being manipulated into believing the things that the capitalist system wants you to believe, and then thinking that you arrived at those conclusions yourself because you're just separated from material reality. And so you don't understand that everything that's operating between your ears was provided for you. You didn't think of it yourself. You think you did, but you didn't think of it yourself. But any analysis shows that people who function like that are parroting exactly what the capitalist system wants them to parrot. Well, immigration is okay as long as they do it legally. I mean that kind of thing. Well, who told you that? Well, I told myself that. I believe that myself. No, you don't. That's an idea that was planted in your mind by the capitalist system, because nothing about this society is legal. Nothing has ever been legal. And this society was founded on illegality. It's maintained on illegality. It's maintained on immorality. So if you're running around here with that reality, which is irrefutable, and you're talking about, well, it's okay for these people to protest as long as they do it legally. It's okay for immigrants to be here as long as they do it legally. This is okay if it's legal. This is okay if it's legal. Then you're basically just a tool for the capitalist system, because what they've done is convince you that everything is okay as long as it fits within their paradigm. And whatever doesn't fit within their paradigm, even though they're the biggest criminals in the history of human existence, then that thing is wrong. So that's what we're talking about there. And because of this reality, the capitalist system always distorts any level of activism. It always does this. So, for example, if we look at the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., most people in present times, 2025 and beyond, view Martin Luther King in a favorable light. But it's important to recognize that and this is not because of the system has lifted Dr. Martin Luther King up. And I'll explain how foolish it is to believe that, if that's what you believe, in a second. But the only reason why there's a favorable view of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is because of the efforts by millions of people to uplift his contributions. That didn't originate with the capitalist media, not at all. That originated through mass on the ground movements, independent education, independent political education. That's where the work of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was uplifted. And that is why he's seen primarily in a favorable light. Although, I understand there are plenty of efforts to attack his legacy, but that's not a new thing. And that's the point I'm making, is that during the time he was alive and active doing his work, it's important for everyone to recognize that he was seen as public enemy number one in this country. He was not, even when he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, there were consistent efforts by the leaders in this country to defame his image. J. Edgar Hoover, the longtime director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, called Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King a notorious liar. Those were his words. Lyndon Johnson, who was president, said that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was one of the most divisive forces in the country during that time. So these people were not people who valued and respected the work of Reverend Dr. King, because his activism, as I mentioned, was organized around challenging the status quo. In fact, it could be argued that his activism, his leadership in the activism he was engaged in, was a serious threat to the status quo, was a serious threat to the capitalist system. And I would argue quite convincingly that this is the reason why he was assassinated. So it's important to know that, because he didn't have, his activism was not celebrated. And this is why even today, most people don't even really understand much of anything about his activism. The only way that the capitalist system talks about Dr. King is through snippets from one speech that he gave, the I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington on August 28th, 1963. That's, if you survey people, and I encourage you to do that, tell me what you know about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in terms of the work that he did. If you ask people that, I would guarantee you 95% of the people you ask that question, the way I framed it, are going to mention the I Have a Dream speech in some way, form, or fashion, because that's all people know. Every year, we're moving into January, and thank God I will be out of the country, because every year I get a headache listening to these backward portrayals of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's work. But what will happen this next month is they'll do the same thing. They will be engaged in this propagation of snippets of the I Have a Dream speech, and they don't even include the best parts of that speech. They typically focus on the uh, I have a dream when black girls and white girls can hold hands and sing the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. That's all that most people know. And that wasn't even the best elements of that particular speech. And that particular speech was not even close to being one of the best speeches Dr. King ever delivered. And if we start talking about some of his much better speeches, like the To America speech or Why I Opposed the War in Vietnam, which he gave a year to the day before he was assassinated, April 4th, 1967, if you look at a speech like that one, where he challenged class contradictions in the American capitalist society. And he talked about how, and he said, quote, America is the greatest purveyor of violence on the planet Earth. This is the type of activism the capitalist system is not promoting. That you won't hear that quote on January 15th. You won't hear that quote anywhere. I don't care who, Wells Fargo or Allstate or whatever these capitalist companies that are endorsing the Dr. Martin Luther King holiday, they ain't gonna show that quote to you. And they don't have to worry about it because they know the overwhelming majority of us ain't gonna study it and find it out on our own. So that's what we mean when we say the capitalist system distorts activism. You know, from its educational curriculum rather, to television, movies, everything, faith institutions. This system does what it does to constantly diminish the need to engage in work to change anything. It promotes the concept that this country is great. You don't have to do anything. And if things are not going well for you in this country, it's only because you're not trying hard enough. You're not putting enough effort in. It's your fault if things are not going well for you. That's it. And you hear that everywhere all the time. And another example is in capitalist countries like the US, they're widely perceived by people in this country as being on the right side of history every time. This country's never wrong every time. That's why, you know, if you want to understand the phenomenon of this cracker that's in office right now as president, that's what it is. The people that support him, because these are people who have never in life learned how to be accountable for anything. If you look at them, that's why, you know, you see these people that were convicted for the what they did on January 6th, 2021 in DC, and were pardoned by this clown. And you know, some of them are turning up being arrested for terrorist plans and actions, for pedophilia, for I mean, these people do not understand accountability in any shape or form. And not only that, but they have no morality. So they're going to be, when you put those two formulas together, you're dealing with people who are going to see themselves as right 100% of the time. They don't have it in them to acknowledge that they're wrong. And so this is why these things can happen the way they happen, because you know, you all, some of you are sitting around waiting for some morality to take place, waiting for these people to wake up. That's never going to happen. This is the result of decades of conditioning and reinforcing the same messaging. And that's the reason why whenever there's any level of activism, that's seen as strange. And I'll phrase that, you know, Kwame Ture used to say that capitalism makes everything strange seem normal, and everything normal seems strange. Capitalism makes everything strange seem normal, and everything normal seem strange. And so when I've talked to young people many times, I've taken that quote from Kwame and I've tried my best to break it down in ways that would resonate for them to make the point that he was trying to make. And so one of the examples I use is speaking on high school campuses. I've told the youth, again, capitalism makes everything strange seem normal, and everything normal seems strange. So the example I've given these youth is that if we went out on the quad right now on your campus where everybody congregates at lunchtime, and I set up a sound system out there, and I started talking the way I'm talking right now about we need to be engaged in work to challenge this system, to bring about justice for marginalized communities, to attack the status quo, the capitalist system, and I or anyone was talking like that through the sound system, those should be normal thoughts because they're correct thoughts, they're logical thoughts. They shouldn't be viewed in any way as being strange or crazy or insane or anything like that. But yet, I guarantee you, this is what I would tell the youth, that if I or anyone did that out here on your quad, most of you and your classmates would walk by and wouldn't even look at us while we were talking, would act like you didn't even see or hear us. Because what should be normal is viewed as strange. By the same token, if we set up that same sound system out in your quad and we had people get up and had some funky beats going and they were rapping to those beats and they were calling women B's and H's, they were calling African people the N word, but they were doing it in rhythm, a lot of you would come to the stage and party with them. And they always laugh when I tell them that because they know it's true. In this instance, making what should be strange normal. This is what capitalism does. So this is the challenge, you all. This is the problem that we have, those of us who are activists. And all you got to do is look at your family and friends. If you even talk, even if you're not engaged in any activism, but you're talking about how important activism is, and you bring that up to them, they're going to respond with logic that reflects the values I just mentioned about how capitalism inverses everything and makes what should be strange normal and what should be normal strange. That's how they're going to react. I'll never forget, I was in Washington, D.C. in 2015 doing some work for the party. And I went to this restaurant to grab a meal. And there was an African there in his probably late 20s. And there was a television there, big screen TV, and they were talking about what was happening at that time in Ferguson, Missouri, the protests that, of course, ended up further advancing the Black Lives Matter movement with the killing of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri by that racist cop. And so that was on TV. And so we were looking at it, and then the young African said, "Oh, that's crazy." And of course, with my consciousness, I assumed, which I shouldn't have, I assumed he was talking about how the police were brutalizing the people on the streets. But I said, yeah, it's crazy how these Gestapos operate. And he looked at me strange, like he didn't understand what I meant. And so I said, well, what did you mean? What were you saying was crazy? And he said, well, that they were out there on the streets acting like that. And so I just, I've been around the block a few times. So I just asked him, so what protests have you ever attended? Because I know instinctively that anybody who responds like that, they clearly don't really have any framework of what they're talking about, right? So that's why I asked him that question. What protests have you been to? Well, I've never been to any protests. I'm like, so if you've never been to a protest, how are you able to evaluate the value of the protests, whether it's legitimate or not? And then he starts talking about how he was National Guard reservist. Okay, so then I knew instinctively what the problem was. He's constantly propagandized, right? Because the job of the National Guard is to go out and quell protests. So of course he's going to be conditioned to believe that protests are a bad thing. But understand what I'm saying. Like, people believe this stuff. This gets back to the last slide, the individual ideas. People believe stuff without any experience with it, without any exposure with it, without having studied it, without having participated in it. And this is the strategy that the capitalist system uses to uh, diminish the effectiveness of activism. So that's the point that we're making. So let's talk about current times, right? And all of these efforts out here to criminalize activism in 2025, right? So what you see on your screen, this is a 7-page report that was recently produced by this group called the Capital Research Center. Now, if you look them up, they're a so-called right-wing think tank, which basically means they're a fascist think tank. That's what they are. And what they've done with this report by this this person, Ryan Morrow, who's a part of this fascist group, marching towards violence, the domestic anti-Israeli protest movement. What they've done with this 7-page report, and if you go on YouTube and type this in, they have a 53-second video that details the report. So you should look at it. It's only 53 seconds. It's not going to rob you of time out of your life, but it'll give you a good perspective to understand what we're talking about here. Because with only an hour for this program, we can't go in depth on everything. The whole what we're trying to do is encourage you, give you the concept, and encourage you to do the work to understand it farther along. So if you look at this report, um, what they're doing is they're looking at groups who challenge the state of Israel, the Zionist state of Israel. And any group that has the audacity to do that, and they've looked at 150 groups in this report, any group that has the audacity to challenge the state of Israel in any shape, form, or fashion, these people producing this report are labeling those 150 groups as domestic terrorists. They're engaging in broad, sweeping accusations against these groups, saying that they're funded by Hamas and all types of nonsense like this. And the groups are the groups that you would imagine are on there uh, in this report: Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, right? Jewish Voices for Peace, JVP, the Community Movement Builders, CMB, and the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. These are some of the groups that are identified in this 7-page report and in the video if you watch it. Because I know a lot of you ain't going to read the report, but at least watch the 53-second video and you'll be able to confirm what I'm talking about. Now, the problem with this, again, what should be strange seems normal, is made to seem normal, and what should be normal is made to seem strange. Is that what they've done with that principle? I keep repeating, is they have convinced so many people that any statement against the state of Israel is an act of terrorism. And they'll do that, and at the same time, can try to convince you that you live in a country where speech is free. That's an oxymoron. You these people, you cannot even criticize the state. We're not talking about criticizing the faith of Judaism. We're talking about the political government, the state of Israel. Any disagreement with Israel, these people are categorizing as domestic terrorism. And if you look at it, you can see the insanity of it because that's the only thing all of these groups that I've identified have in common, that in some way, form, or fashion, they've done some work. They've spoke out. They've talked about the state of Israel. They've talked about the Zionist movement. They've talked about how wrong Zionism is. But I can tell you without question, in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, I've been around and involved in this organization over 4 decades. We don't receive a single dime from Hamas. We don't receive a single dime from any goddamn body. And that's it. I mean, I wish we did get some money from somebody. We don't receive no money from nobody. The money that we have to do our work comes out of our pocket. And how many few of you decide to do the things we ask you to do, like go to our Forward Ever shop and buy clothing, buy my book so I can buy anti-fascist material. The few of you who actually follow through and do those things, that's the only money and the dues that we pay as members. That's it. There's no money coming for anybody. These people, some hate person who's been thoroughly propagandized by this nonsense said, well, you get your money through George Soros. Because they always say that, right? It's just a talking point. They don't even know who the hell he is or what he does. And I'm like, well, if you know how to get money from him, no strings attached. I wish you would forward some of us to us. Like you have no money from nobody. So this is what they do, you all. And the thing why it's so weird is that you have groups in here like Jewish Voices for Peace, because their whole thing is like all these groups are anti-Semitic. Of course, they always say that. But Jewish Voices of Peace, which is primarily made up of older Europeans who identify as Ashkenazi Jews, right? So, but they do a lot of good work calling out, what's happening with the state of Israel. They've been one of the groups that's been very effective at articulating the amount of money the U.S. provides to the state of Israel each year, the billions of dollars in aid. And so that's the reason why, groups like them are on this list. Our group, our organization is on there because of the political education we've engaged in against the Zionist state of Israel for decades now. And so this is it. But the problem with this is that what they do in this report, they don't do it in the video because it's only 53 seconds. The video is about encouraging you to read the report. But what they do in the report, and you can look at the report, you can download it free. I've done it, I've read it because I want to understand what they're talking about so I can talk about it with intelligence. I don't want to just talk about it and not know what the hell I'm talking about. So I read the whole thing. And what they're doing at the end of the report is they give recommendations. This is the danger in this. They give recommendations for what should happen to these organizations and the people within these groups. And their recommendations are for the groups that are nonprofit. And some of them are, I'm not going to tell you which ones are. You should do your own research. I know which ones are nonprofit and which ones aren't, but it's none of your business if you don't take the time to know yourself. So the ones that are nonprofit, they encourage that, they give step-by-step instructions on how people can engage in work to, dismantle the nonprofit status for these groups. Now, the All African People's Revolutionary Party is an independent revolutionary party. We're not a nonprofit. So that doesn't work for us. And they identify that in the report. Like when they talk about us, they indicate like they're not nonprofit. So for groups like ours, they suggest like efforts to criminalize our efforts to surveil us. They say that in the report that people should look at what we're doing, come to our events, and try to find pathways to get us arrested and charges be leveled against us for the work that we do. Now, again, understand what they're talking about. They're talking about none of these groups are going out here and engaging in violence against people who display Israeli flags. We don't have time for that nonsense. I don't give a damn what kind of flag you display. I don't give a damn about you. I'm trying to win the hearts and minds of the African masses. So what we're doing is we're having events where we talk about and educate around this question of Zionism. We talk about the Zionist movement's exploitation of Africa's human and material resources. We talk about the history of the Zionist movement. We talk about Zionism's efforts to exploit and brutalize the Palestinian people. We talk about how they train militaries and police throughout Africa to brutalize African people so they can continue to control the diamond trade in Africa. We talk about how they sabotage African movements here in the US because these movements are oftentimes anti-Zionist, like the AAPRP and the Nation of Islam and all of these groups that have historically challenged the Zionist state of Israel. So that's all we're doing is educating people about this. And they're advocating in their report, read it yourself, that people come here and find ways, really, the suggestion is make up shit to get us arrested and to put us in legal peril and even to jeopardize our lives, to put our lives at risk. This is what these people are doing. So that's why you have to know. And the important thing to recognize is that the people that produce reports like this, because there are a number of them, like now the so-called Justice Department is producing a report of domestic terrorist groups. And I'm going to tell you right now, their list is not completely out, but I'll tell you right now, they're not going to have the Ku Klux Klan on there, which is without question the number one domestic terrorist group in the history of this backward ass country, having killed thousands of people, murdered people, lynched people, set people's houses on fire, terrorized people for literally decades. They've done this for 150 years. They've done this. They're not going to be on the list. The groups that are going to be on the government produced list of domestic terrorists, so-called Justice Department, are going to be these same activist organizations. And what's important about that is they're not directing this list towards those of you out here who support these organizations, support the AAPRP, support community movement builders, support Students for Justice in Palestine, support the Black Alliance for Peace because they're also in this report as well. They're not targeting you if you support these groups. They're targeting your family members, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, people that don't know anything about activism, the people I've mentioned in the first couple of slides who have been convinced that activism is strange and shouldn't be happening. That's who this is targeted for. That's why they use such language that you would hear like, oh, they're funded by Hamas, and you would laugh. You're like, that's crazy as hell. But your family's not going to laugh. They're going to believe it. Your friends are not going to laugh. They're going to believe it. Your coworkers are not going to laugh. They're going to believe it. And what this does is it creates an environment where it's not safe to engage in activism because so many people see the activists as terrorists. So this is their objective, you all. And that's why we have to get so many more people involved than we have right now in helping us do this work. We don't have the luxury of so many of you sitting on the sidelines the way that you do. We don't have that luxury. By you doing that, you're putting people you know who are activists in danger. You're doing that because you're allowing them to be out there by themselves while this type of work is taking place to sabotage us and put our lives in danger. That's what you're doing. Whether you mean to do that or not is irrelevant to us. It's happening. So you got to make a decision. I'm not saying you have to join the APRP because a lot of you, you're not ready to. No, that's not what we're saying right now. But what you can do is begin to be more forthright in your efforts to support activist work until you get to the point where you're ready to do it yourself. And hopefully that is something that you're moving towards, right? So, you got to understand propaganda. You got to understand. And the danger in reports like the Marching Towards Violence report I just mentioned is, again, it's aimed at people who don't know about activism. That's 95% of our population, right? And their objective is to convince the majority of people that literally anything that doesn't march lockstep with the agenda of the capitalist system is demonic, criminal, and has to be stopped. This is the classic blueprint for a fascist society. That's what a fascist society looks like, where everything that doesn't fall lockstep in line with the ruling class has to be crushed. There's no discussion, there's no debate, there's no analysis, there's no education. It's just these people need to be stopped, and you run and make sure you do everything you can to sabotage them, right? And if you want to gauge how effective these types of campaigns are, again, just talk to people, just survey random people, ask them what they think of protests in general, and listen to what they say. Ask them about organizations that are considered radical. Ask them about individuals that are considered radical and hear what they say. And by listening to their responses, you will know what's taking place here. There's a concerted effort to criminalize activism and to make it unsafe to engage in activism. And I'm not understand what we're talking about here today. We're not saying, "Oh my God, they're doing this to us." This is what they're saying. Look, the capitalist system is the enemy of humanity. This is exactly what they're supposed to do. I'm not upset that they're doing. I know that that's what they're going to do. I would be disappointed if they didn't do it because they wouldn't be serious about upholding their exploitative system. I understand who they are. I'm not confused about who they are at all. So I expect them to do that. I expect them to dehumanize people like us. This is what they do. The message we're trying to get across is for those of you who consider yourselves on the side of justice. By you sitting on the sidelines, you're unconsciously assisting their efforts. That's the point we're trying to make today. You are creating a space that allows them to be successful in the work they're doing. They cannot be successful without people like you. They cannot be successful without people like you who are doing nothing to support activist work other than just talking about you support activist work. But beyond that, doing nothing, contributing nothing to activism efforts, not getting involved in activism yourself, not telling people about activism, not talking about it. When you get over here for these reactionary holiday dinners, when something is said or something comes on TV, you don't say anything because you don't want to be in an uncomfortable situation. You are contributing to this environment by behaving that way. That's the message that we're going to get across. So on the screen, on the left-hand side of the screen, like one of the things these folks do all the time is they what we call dox people. And that's where they find activists and they take information on the activists and they post it online and they encourage people, they post pictures of the activists and they encourage people to know who these people are. There's only one reason for that, to put these activists at risk. That's why they do this. That's why they dox people. And so what I have on the screen here is a recent one that some crackers did on me. Right, I've had this done a number of times, and they list whatever information they have. They list it. If they have your address, they'll list that. Or if they're not too lazy to find it, they'll put it on there. A lot of these people are very lazy, but they'll do that. They'll put as much information, and they want you to be harassed. They want you to be harmed. They want you to be killed. That's why they do that. But you can tell that by looking at what they write that they don't spend a lot of time doing research. Like on me, they wrote here. They have a picture. I didn't post the picture because y'all know what I look like. They know what I look like. An author of Hood Communists. Now that's just something they saw online because I've seen that online. They didn't even, they just copied what they saw online. They don't even know what that means. And then they say a nationalist communist party. That's what the hell are you talking about? I mean, if you're talking about the APRP and they say we don't know what ideology we are, like these people, they're not serious thinkers, right? And they say that we're basically fake black national socialists. I guess that's what Nat Socks means. I don't know. Um, and then what the rest of what they say doesn't make sense. And this is from this group called the East Pine Tree Party. And I looked them up, and they consider themselves, or I guess, or they're being labeled, or I don't know what the hell the crackers call themselves, but they're being labeled as what they call an eco-fascist group, meaning that they, in some dysfunctional way, combine environmentalism with fascism. And so they state that they do not believe in government, central government, and they encourage people to arm themselves in this society. And these are people that are saying that we're domestic terrorists. Say you can't, we're not encouraging nobody to arm themselves because most of you are just not serious and committed enough to be trusted with weapons at this stage in history. You have never heard any of us say that, but they say that, but yet we're the domestic terrorists. So I'm telling you this so that you can have an understanding of what's happening, right? So, like it says, this is a recent attempt against me. You should look these things up. They call it Antifa Watch. I mean, that's the only thing they got. The only thing they got right is my name. They got my picture right. And yeah, without question, I'm Antifa. But I mean, this is what happens, right? Like, even at the job I'm at, some Europeans complain that, I talk about Antifa too much. I don't talk about it enough. But they said I talk about it too much. And they complained about it. Like, this is all an effort to isolate, discredit, and criminalize activist activity. The sole purpose of all of this is to isolate us for state repression and worse, meaning death. That's what they're doing. This is the campaign. And you should see this for what it is. This is COINTELPRO 2025 and beyond. The strategy during the 1960s was to infiltration, and they still do that too. But infiltration, where they plant people, informants in organizations, and the job of the informant is to gain the trust of everybody in the organization and then engage in sabotage. So, a lot of people are confused about this. Like, they'll be at a march or a rally or something, and somebody will come and talk real crazy, and they'll be like, "That's a uh, government informant." No, that's probably just somebody that's just crazy, because when everybody sees that person, they don't know them. They think they're not going to listen to what they're saying. You have never been in a march or rally where some unknown clown walks up saying, "Let's burn a building down," and everybody's like, "Okay, where are the matches? Where's the lighter fluid?" That's not going to happen. So that's not a government informant. And if it is, that's a very stupid government informant. The government informant is someone who joins the organization, does a lot of work, okay, wins the respect and trust of people, then starts acting a fool. Then starts acting a fool. That's the government informant. All right. But that's not the primary with the, with the development of the internet and all of this that we have available to us now that wasn't here in the 60s. Now they can use these methods of doxing people, um, producing these types of online reports, engaging in consistent propaganda that's designed to dehumanize activists and to discredit activism and set us up to be isolated for state repression or worse. That's what they're trying to do. So, again, let's look at it like this. Uh, we have political institutions like Veterans Day, for example. These types of institutions serve to make imperialism sentimental and emotional. You were in the military, your family was in the military, whatever the case may be. And because they exploited you and pimped you for however long you were in there, you, of course, understandably want to try to pull some dignity from that experience. I mean, there's a few insane people that say, "I love the military," but most of the people I know, Africans, indigenous people, most of these people that are in the military, it was a necessity for them to be able to get a job and gain some skills and try to do that. Very few of these marginalized community people are talking about it like it was the best thing that happened in their life. There are a few of them that do too, because I mean, insanity is common in the capitalist system, but for the most part, that's not true. So they want to make it sentimental and emotional so that they know they're not going to get you by saying, "Hey, this was the best experience in your life." Talk about it like that. So instead, what they do is they say, "Well, you did it, you contributed this. And so we're going to say that we respect you for that. And so you want to get that attention because you didn't get that anywhere else in your life. So you put on your uniform on Veterans Day, you post pictures, and people say thank you. And you get some sort of credit that you never got, that you most likely don't deserve, but you get it anyway because that's how capitalism works. So that's what they want to do with this, um, and they do that, um, and then what they do is that allows, either consciously or unconsciously, since you were serving imperialism by being part of the armed forces of imperialism, then unconsciously or consciously, you're uplifting imperialism by carrying out the actions I just described. And then by doing that, it makes it creates the environment where they can carry out the type of criminal activity they're engaging against the people of Venezuela right now, right? The people of Cuba. They can do that because it all stems from this overwhelming umbrella of imperialism. And again, what should be strange seems normal. Imperialism should be strange. Invading people's countries and stealing them and stealing everything from them and killing them, that should be strange. But under capitalism, it's been normalized. So the US does it every day. So if they bomb Iran, no problem there. If they bomb Venezuela, no problem there. They're supposed to do that. Those people are criminals. If they starve out the Cuban people, the people of Nicaragua, that should do that. Those people are criminals. If they support the illegal overthrow of democratically elected governments and assassinate the leaders, well, I don't care about that. That's just normal everyday stuff. What should be strange seems normal, and then what should be normal seems strange. And when people stand up against countries being invaded, then that's strange. What are they doing if they're the problem? When people stand up against imperialism, that should be the problem. So this is what they're doing in this society. And what we need is more people to speak out against it in a consistent fashion, not once every couple of months, but every goddamn day we need people, because they're doing what they're doing every day. So we got to do what we need to do every day. The intention that they're engaged in is to create an environment where political activism, things like criticizing Zionism, criticizing police terrorism, criticizing homophobia, patriarchy, white supremacy, criticizing any element of the capitalist system is viewed as extreme. And the people engaged in this work criticizing these backward systems are seen as the problem, are singled out, are targeted, and set up for destruction. And what we need, the best weapon we have to combat that, if you don't agree that that's a good thing, and some of you on here are the fascists doing this, so we're not talking to you, but the people on here who are genuine and want to do something for the good of humanity, the best weapon we have, the only weapon really, is organization. You have got to get involved on some level. We have to have more voices out here. The only way that what I just showed you they did against me can be successful is when you sit on the sidelines, and that allows them, they could get to me, they can take my voice away. But what we have to do, and that's not, I don't, if they do, they do. You know, these crackers and these graham crackers, they got one shot. If they get to me in the one shot, they got me. I'm not worried. I don't spend a single second worried about that. If they miss in that one shot, it's going to be a bad day for them. But that's not even important. What's important is that if they do get us, you're ready to step in, or you're ready to recruit somebody to step in. You're ready to support somebody stepping in. That's what's critical. Otherwise, the efforts we're making will fail. And we don't intend upon failing. So we want to thank you for joining us today. We want to ask you to join us next week, December 21st, December's holiday pressure and consumer debt in the US. With everything being so expensive under these liars and these cheaters and these bastards that run this backward ass society, people's debt is rising, but yet that they still have this pressure to buy all this stuff up with money they didn't have to begin with. So we're going to be talking about the impacts of that, what people are dealing with rising debt. The QR code in the upper left-hand corner, the red and white one, you can get our programs on there, other APRP programs, including this one. Again, as I mentioned, go to the Forward Ever shop. You know you're going to be trying to buy presents for people. So if you're doing that, buy something that makes a contribution to society and not just a contribution into the pockets of the capitalist system. So buy clothes that represent positive revolutionary messaging and help us finance the work that we have to do. Go to hoodcommunist.org, Revolutionary African blog. You can get information there that you need to understand what's going on in the world. We have self-defense classes, community self-defense. We engage in political education, and we have self-defense training free of charge every Thursday, except this Thursday, December 18th. I will be out of town. We will have class on Thursday, December 25th. Y'all think I'm joking when I say I don't celebrate these people's holidays. I don't. I'll be ready to teach class. And if nobody shows up, then I'll use the time to do some writing. So either way, it's going to be productive. But if you want to come on December 25th and, following Thursdays, it's at 2775 Cottage Way, like cottage cheese, Cottage Way, Unit 15, Sacramento, for those of you here. So come on out, 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15. And we want to invite you to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party by going to AAPRP-intl.org. And the QR code in the bottom right, the black and white one, you can become a monthly sponsor however much you can for our work in the Sahel region in Africa to bring revolutionary literature for organizing purposes. So become a monthly sponsor and participate there. And we want you to buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's only $8 for a paperback copy, only $5 for the digital version. You can scan that QR code next to the book and get it. If you already have it, thank you. But if you don't have it, or if you already have it, either way, tell people about it. This is what we've been talking about this whole program. Help us do this work. Tell people about it. Form a book club unit to read the book, That's a wonderful thing. Say you're going to call at least one bookstore in your city and ask them to order the book and get it in there so people can buy it. Your library, do the same thing. 100% of the proceeds from the sale of my book go towards financing anti-fascist work. This is necessary. So we appreciate you. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Don't be discouraged. The masses are winning. Forward ever.